being an adoptee with parents and family members that don't look like me, it really did influence my self-confidence and my identity growing up. But it also influenced my cultural competency and being able to honor diverse perspectives, knowing that just because someone doesn't look like me doesn't mean that we can't find common ground and there isn't something that I can
Absolutely.
learn from you. And yeah, so growing up, navigating that cultural identity was difficult, but it really shaped me into the person I am today, especially when I'm entering spaces where I'm being made to feel like I'm unwelcome just because of the way that I look.
Hey, welcome to RAA Talks. I'm your host, Raihana, and I'm so excited to have you back with us. We got a great guest on the show for you today. Joining me today is Elizabeth Johnson. Elizabeth is a cybersecurity professional with a background in social work, bringing a unique perspective to the tech world. After transitioning from social work to IT, she found her passion in cybersecurity, where she combines her understanding of human behavior with technical expertise to strengthen security practices. As a woman of color in tech, Elizabeth is passionate about mentorship, representation, and creating spaces where others from non-traditional backgrounds can thrive. Elizabeth, it's such a pleasure to have you on the show. I was looking forward to this day for a really long time. What are you looking forward to before we jump right into the conversation?
I'm just looking forward to having a really genuine and engaging conversation. It's my first podcast experience, so I'm just super excited to be here with you.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. And I appreciate you in advance being vulnerable to share. I know sometimes it can be a little uncomfortable, but I always tell people at Raw Talks, many of the people we interview, it's their first time. So you're not alone. And it's going to be a great takeaway for listeners, I'm sure. So listeners, you guys got some good content coming in as we dive into this conversation. And so, it's interesting that in your intro, you mentioned you were previously in social work for a number of years, and suddenly there was a move to cybersecurity. So I was just wondering, could you start off by giving us a little bit of an overview of what do you do as a cybersecurity professional, especially for some women who might be looking to get into the field? I think that could be really helpful for them to know about you.
Yeah, of course. So, kind of starting at the beginning of my journey, just to give context of where I started at, I had a very non-traditional journey into cybersecurity. I originally started my career in social work and earning a bachelor's and a master's degree before becoming state certified as an
Wow.
advanced practice social worker. Yeah. And then I spent about 7 years working with children in the foster care systems, doing case management and crisis intervention. And then in 2021, I decided to go back to school to get my bachelor's degree in cybersecurity, which opened up the door for me to my jobs as a software engineer and now my current position as a network and systems administrator for a higher education institution.
Let me pause you right there real quick, because you said
Yeah.
you got a bachelor's and master's. You've been doing social work for, I think, 7 to 8 years, if I heard correctly. And
Yes.
then you had to take an ego hit to go back for a second bachelor's. How did that make you feel? And what was going through your head at that time when you were thinking, well, I want to move into this new field, but I have to start from the ground up? What was going on in your mind at that time?
Yeah, it was a very seismic shift for me to make that switch, not just mentally, but to physically go out there and start letting people know and informing my loved ones that this is what I was deciding to do. It was a big, big shift. And it was hard not to feel like I was being put back to level one or
Yeah.
starting with a blank canvas. But throughout this entire journey, it's helped me realize that no one is starting with a blank canvas. I'm bringing all of the previous lessons and experiences I've learned in my previous career and even my life experiences are contributing to my perspective as a cybersecurity professional now.
Well, that makes so much sense. I was reminded of an example that I'll share later, but it's so true. Whatever you learn in your previous field or just growing up, all of that contributes to something later on in life, whether recent or much later, and you
Hmm.
find value in it. So you can always repurpose what you've learned. Before you continue more about what you do as a cybersecurity professional, since we're kind of backtracking a little bit, what
Mhm.
made you want to make that switch? Because I mean, 7 years, that's a pretty long time to be in a field where you're at the point where, I'm kind of mid-career. I'm going to think about leveling up now, going into management and director roles and so forth, or even going into expanding my reach to a broader organization. What made you want to switch at that time?
It So the time that I made this decision to switch careers, it actually coincided with the COVID-19 pandemic. And
Okay.
like many other people at that time, I had a lot of time to just reflect on where I was in my life and the choices I'd made to be where I am. And I realized that I was no longer passionate about social work. And even though I loved working with my clients, I loved helping people, I just really wasn't finding fulfillment. And I was having a really hard time even just getting up in the morning and getting dressed and finding the energy to meet my clients where they were every day. So that's when I realized like I need to make a change. And that was one of the biggest motivators for me was just burnout from the job.
Wow, that sounds pretty intense. And
Mm.
I mean, COVID feels like it was so long ago. And then you mentioned it, and I'm like, well, yeah,
Yeah.
well, people are working from home. Obviously, you don't have time to commute, so you can use that time to self-reflect, which I highly promote
Mm.
as a coach. It's so important to just have that time to reflect, which we don't have time for nowadays. But when you
Right.
were reflecting and you experienced that burnout, it makes sense that you would pivot to something else. And in that moment of thinking, well, what's my next step? How did cybersecurity enter? I mean, it's completely different from
Yeah.
social work. So how did this new thought come to your mind that made you say, you know what, I think I want to try this out. This is a space that I think I could thrive in.
Yes, it wasn't an immediate realization that I wanted to go into cybersecurity. I spent a lot of time focusing on things that I enjoyed doing, skills that I had, things that were transferable to other fields. And initially, my thought process was, which I think what a lot of people feel when they are initially kind of coming upon this realization they want to switch careers, is that maybe I'll just pivot slightly and do something that's similar to social work or in a side field or something like that.
Sure,
But
yeah.
for me, I wasn't interested in going into criminal justice or health and human services or anything adjacent to social work. And with the help of my support network, I realized that IT was something that I was really interested in. It was a gap in knowledge I had, and it was something that I wanted to become more proficient in. And cybersecurity was a great spot where it intersects human behavior and technology and solutions, and it felt like a perfect fit.
Wow. So that sounds like you had people in your network who influenced you and provided these fresh perspectives beyond what you already know. Because as you were saying, it's so natural to think about, okay, well, this is causing me to not feel fulfillment. Let me find something that's not going too far out of my comfort, but still
Right.
similar. But I think it just reinforces the importance of having these third party perspectives. As I always recommend, it's so nice to have a coach, a mentor, people outside of your friend circle who are not going
Mm.
to share things. You love doing this. Why don't you try this? They're just going to bias your perspective. Like you need somebody to really challenge you. Like, hey, have you heard about this? This is trending. You might be interested in this because your skill set might make the right fit. And so those
Exactly.
perspectives are so valuable. And it sounds like that's exactly what you got at the right time to and on top of that, I don't think you noticed this, but I'm going to share it with you because I observed that you seem like the type of person that is willing to take on a new challenge, even though you have no idea what's going on in that territory, but you're going to thrive in learning as you're experiencing this challenge. But you let me know how accurate that observation was when I was kind of evaluating what you're saying and picking that up.
No, that's funny that you say and call that out because I feel like that's something that I've developed because I went through this journey and because
Mm,
I've had to push myself out of my comfort zone and to put myself into unfamiliar spaces. It's really
yeah.
helped build up my confidence around venturing into the unknown. But I will be honest, in the beginning of this journey, I was absolutely terrified and it was a very overwhelming decision that did not come easily to me. And so but now that I am at this point in my journey, I look back and I think, yeah, no, I can do hard things. I can take on challenges, but only because I put myself through this process.
That makes so much sense. When you just said that, like I can do hard things, it reminds me of a conversation. And listeners, you guys should look out for this episode with Myla Racel Sarmiento. She was talking about failure in our conversation together and how like she was going through a challenge and it was again similar to yours, unknown. And she realized, well, hey, I did this in the past, so I can do this too. And it was very
Mhm.
similar to what you just said about I can do hard things because I went through this experience. But you also mentioned you were terrified. So I'm just curious for someone who might be listening and it was like, I'm just in that same boat. Help me understand how to deal with that terror and those feelings of fear and when there's so much unknown. What did you experience at that time and how did you kind of cope with that feelings of terror and fear when you're experiencing these unknowns, even though you want to make this move for the better of your career advancement?
Yes, absolutely. Whenever I felt that overwhelming fear, and I think maybe this is a similar shared experience that if anyone's going through this process themselves, there's this feeling of initial excitement, like I'm going to do something different. I'm going to make a change. It's going to be good for me. I'm so excited about it. And almost immediately, there's this feeling of guilt or anxiety that comes in and kind of overshadows the excitement and brings it down. So it's like this constant ebb and flow of, oh my gosh, I'm excited about this, but then I'm also absolutely terrified. Like, is this the right choice? So for me, navigating those internal struggles, I really got through those by relying on people in my network, also by just kind of putting my thoughts down into writing and actually reading them back to myself and thinking, is this a truth or is this something I'm just kind of making up in my mind and maybe blowing out of proportion a little bit? I think one of the things that helped me the most throughout this process and through that initial anxiety of making this decision was going back to, why am I making this choice? What are my reasons for doing this? If I have very strong motivations for making this choice, then I'm not going to look back. I'm going to just look full speed ahead and commit to it and make small actionable steps that are still pushing me towards my goal.
Wow, that's amazing. So I heard you say, in this moment of fear and excitement, really leaning on your network helped. So again, the same people that helped you to get excited about this topic and this transition are the same ones who kind of worked you through the fears of it as well. And just trusting yourself in the process. Like I heard you say, like writing it down. So it sounds like you're writing it down without bias, without judgment, and then looking at it afterwards and saying, is this actually truth or am I getting in my own way? And I think many times that happens to a lot of us. But the writing it down part is so important. And that's what I teach, my clients is the more you just spend time up here in your mind, the more you're going to psych yourself out. You're going to buy into self-doubt. You're going to start feeling guilty. You're going to find reasons to justify what you're feeling and why you should do A and not B. And it's just going to be harder. And you come to decision paralysis and you're like, forget about it. I'm just going to stay where I am with what I know and I'm not going to move forward. And that can be detrimental because imagine for you in your situation, for example, if you had not taken those steps, because when you're feeling that fear can sometimes overcome the excitement and pull you back to where you're comfortable and start questioning, I'm excited about this, but can I kind of reinvigorate my excitement that I once had about social work and find another way to make it work? Because this other thing was just too hard, and it's sometimes that happens. So I think what you were saying about writing it down and then looking at, is this actually truth or am I just kind of making up reasons here to protect myself in a way that I feel like I'm protecting myself, even though it's holding you back from growth? And I think that was a powerful tool for you. But how did that help you? You wrote it down, you talked to people. Then what happened after you took those steps?
Then it was at that point, it was just on me to take action and to act on what I was wanting to manifest. And it felt like there were so many different things I needed to do. It was overwhelming, the decisions I needed to make sometimes, but just starting off with small steps like, okay, I'm interested in cybersecurity. What can I do to inform myself more about what that job entails? Like, I need to know what that involves on a day-to-day basis if I know I want to go into it or not. And so I would look up YouTube videos, a day in the life of a cybersecurity expert or a day in the life of a software engineer, and just kind of build my knowledge base of what the job actually involves. And then after that, I'm like, okay, what's next? I'm interested in it. So I would have to go back to school. What schools are in my area? Are there programs available for me? Would it be a certificate or a degree? Really like breaking down the information and just kind of digesting it into a plan. And once I had the information I needed, I knew that this was the degree I wanted to go with. I took the next step and just invested in it. And it was a big step. It was something I was investing in with my own finances. And if I failed, it was going to be on me. But that really pushed me to work harder, knowing that these courses, I'm paying for them. They're coming out of my own budget, and I'm not going to squander this opportunity or my own financial stability because something was difficult. Or, even if something was difficult, I'm asking myself, am I just frustrated with this with this assignment, with this topic? Is this topic just really difficult for me? Or is it the bigger decision I'm making? And every time I would ask myself that, it would always just be like, okay, it's just this small thing. And it's making everything else feel harder. But when I'm focusing on solving these smaller problems that are in my way, it just kind of made it easier down the road to kind of just block them as they came.
Do you practice self-awareness pretty often? Like
I do.
journaling,
I try to.
reflecting? Yeah, I can see that from the way you're talking about, because you're trying to like parse out your thoughts and think about, well, what's really happening here? Am I getting in my own way? Or is this actually a big thing that's stopping me? Or is it a small thing? Okay, yeah, it's a small thing.
Right.
So you're like talking yourself through it as if you are your own guide to
Yes.
kind of help you through what's holding you back. So I'm like, that's something that I try to teach people, but I can see you're very well adept in that. And that's not
Thank
something
you.
that most people have. So that's a really great skill. Just wanted to point that out. But I
Thank
think
you.
that's really important, that what you mentioned. And, you know, when you were saying going back and getting a degree, many folks that are out there looking to get into tech or even cybersecurity, so many women that I'm talking to and hearing about on social media, getting into cybersecurity. How did you know the degree, like a bachelor's degree, was going to be your entry point versus doing a boot camp? And how did you make that decision?
Yes, that was a question that came up early on in my journey, and I wrestled with it. But what I found to be most helpful in finding clarity with that specific question was asking other people's opinions who were already in the field and just gauging what their feelings were about that, what the climate was like at the time. And at the time, I spoke with other women and men who were in IT and cybersecurity, and it was a pretty big spectrum of opinions. Many people were saying you don't need a degree. You could just go to a boot camp or get a certification and that'll be enough. And then there were other people who were saying you should get your master's degree if you want to be considered qualified for even like entry level positions. So taking all of those perspectives and trying to just find a happy medium with them all, I decided to just go with what I thought was best at the time, which was a bachelor's. And it actually just happened to work out that in my area, there were no associates or certificates available for cybersecurity. It was only a bachelor's degree that was the option. So I kind of just took that as that's the path I'm going with. But yeah,
You said
it
that
took a lot of
you
time and
took the,
research.
you said after, sorry about that. You said you evaluate everything that you got from your network. So you asked people who said masters is the way to entry level and others are boot camp. But in the end, you said, I took the decision that was best for me and I went to the degree path for bachelor's. How did you know that was the best for you, given all the other spectrum of advice that you received?
I just had to trust myself. And I knew that it was a good, happy middle ground. I wasn't going way off to one end of the spectrum or other. I was kind of just putting myself into a safe zone in the middle, saying, like, I can do a bachelor's. A 2-year associate's would be easier and faster, but I really want to understand this field and I want to get the full experience. And I felt like the bachelor's was the best way to go. And the program that I ended up going with Herzing University, it was very comprehensive. It covered a bunch of different topics that I was interested in. So I felt like it was going to be a good fit for me.
That makes sense. And, you know, I'm glad that you mentioned that, because so many times, like I mentioned, decision paralysis is a real thing. And when you
Yes.
ask so many people, everybody will give you a different, you know, piece of advice. Like, and then it becomes, well, which one do I choose? Which direction do I go when I have no clue about how to even begin? And I'm looking for guidance, but the guidance is so widespread. But then at the end of the day, there is that thing that you have to do, what you just said. Trust yourself. And sometimes we feel like, well, how can we trust ourselves? We end up doubting ourselves so much unconsciously that we find it so difficult to even trust our own intuition to guide our path, to make the right call. And even if we're thinking, well, yeah, we can take this decision, our self-doubt comes in again. And it's like, well, how can you take that decision? How can you say yes to this bachelor's? Just do the boot camp. Because if you don't like it, you're not investing so much money. You're not investing so much time. You can just, you can leave early. You can always go after a month. Hey, I don't like this. I get my money back. You see what I'm saying? Like, it's when you have self-doubt and you don't even know about it, you subconsciously take the trust away from yourself, from choosing what's best for you, because it's out of this natural protection mechanism in us, this like, there's like a fear that you might hurt yourself. So your mind tries to protect you in different ways by keeping you in a box where you're
Yeah.
comfortable with what you know. And so I think that was a really important tool that you mentioned, just trusting yourself. It sounds so simple, but it's actually really hard. What helps you to, I'm sure you must have done stuff before that to get to that point, to just trust yourself, right? So what are some practices that you do to develop better trust and confidence in yourself so that you can, when the timing comes to make a decision, you can, in fact, trust yourself to make the right decision?
It's come from a lot of just the successes and failures, trial and error, really. And it's a brutal, honest, and raw experience, but it's coming into this decision with prior life experience and a previous degree. And being at the age that I was, I felt like I had learned enough about what I don't want from my career and what's going to contribute to the goals that I have long term, that I had an idea about that. So I was able to use that sort of guiding principle, own my own desires and my own goals to prevent me from getting stuck in any kind of decision paralysis. Like you said, it's really gets overwhelming in the moment, and it's hard not to feed into those thoughts and those negative feelings and just get lost in them and sidetracked. But for me, acting before I think too much about something can actually be helpful for me. And so if it's not like a major life decision, like, well, this is a major life decision, but if it's something like which degree do I go with? If I'm feeling drawn toward bachelor's degree and nothing's really pulling me in any other way, I'm not going to stop and just think like, okay, is this the right decision? I'm going to, what I did was I just went with it. I'm like, okay, bachelor's it is. And I'm going to do that. And I'm throwing myself into this because I knew that I did not want to go back to social work. And even though social work was waiting for me and I had a successful career there I could go back to, I didn't want to. I really had no desire to do that. And so I was just like, if I'm going to do this, I'm committing to it 100%.
I love how you mentioned that. And like one thing that really stood out from what you just said was I knew what I didn't want. And sometimes I feel like even when you're like a little kid, people ask, so what do you want to be when you grow up? Right? It's
Yeah.
always, what do you want?
Yes.
And sometimes you don't know what you want.
Right.
And so then it's like, well, if I don't know what I want, how can I make a decision? And so I think that's probably where that self-doubt starts coming in. Like you start feeling, well, how can I not know what I want? I know me. I should be able to answer that question. But it's so interesting that you mentioned I knew what I didn't want. But that's actually not not a bad way to go about it. It's actually a really nice way because then you can start eliminating and you don't have that pressure of choosing one thing, but you're reducing the numbers of decisions you have to make by creating a smaller pool. And then you can come to the question, well, out of these, what do I want? And I think that's probably what you were experiencing here because it's you asked people, you knew you didn't want to go back to social work. You were trying this thing out for cybersecurity. But if in the end it turned out, well, actually, I don't want this, then you can go back to your pool of smaller options to choose from and try some of those out too. But what do you think about that option? I mean, that cybersecurity is working out for you, but if that occurred for you, what do you think you would have done?
No, that was a very real fear of mine that once I started this program, that I would realize that it was not for me, that I didn't want to do this. It it was funny because when I had that feeling or I had that fear of that happening, that was a fear that I had when I was back in social work, even in my undergraduate career. And I had peers who were switching programs left and right, and it felt like something natural to do at that age and at that point in your life. But since I was going back to school, there was this added pressure of I can't just be jumping back and forth. I need to make a decision. This is my life, and I'm ready for a career, and I want this to be it. But if it's not, then at least I know that I have skills that I can pivot and I can use to transfer to a different field. So there was never so much a fear of failing or crashing out of a program that I didn't love. It was more so I have skills and I'm putting them towards a new industry. I just need to find which industry, which field, which role that is, but it's not social work.
No, that makes so much sense. And I'm hearing a lot of confidence come out of you right now in terms
Thank
of
you.
making this decision and being able to really navigate this transition without any self-doubt and feeling like I don't know what I'm doing. but you and I both know there was some point where you experienced elements of imposter syndrome. And I'm not doubting your confidence, but I'm curious about the whole, amidst all this confidence that you emit regarding cybersecurity and making this decision and trusting yourself, imposter syndrome hit, and you're entering the tech world from a non-traditional background, which can often lead to these feelings of imposter syndrome. How did you navigate those feelings? And what advice would you give to others facing similar challenges?
Yes, imposter syndrome was one of the biggest challenges I had when I made this transition in careers. I felt like I had to work twice as hard to prove my value, not just to my team, but to myself. And I often hesitated to speak up because I was very afraid that I would say the wrong thing or just look like a fool and embarrass myself and ruin my reputation. So it was very present throughout my entire journey. And what helped push me through it was reminding myself that everybody starts somewhere. And like we were talking about before, we're not starting with a blank canvas, even though it feels like we are. It feels like we're being put back on training wheels. And it's frustrating because we want to be proficient, we want to be skilled, and we want to be able to contribute to our team. It's just not going to be that. It's going to be a journey, and there's going to be a lot of ups and downs, but leaning into those uncomfortable feelings and taking on challenges and leaning on my network again and taking all these opportunities to get more hands-on experience were really what helped push me through the imposter syndrome.
You need to consider a job in motivational speaking,
Thank
because
you.
every line that you're saying after every couple questions I'm asking, I'm just thinking like this needs to go on a quote book. Like I'm going to
Thank
make a
you.
book of quotes for all the guests on my podcast, like the top quotes from every podcast. I'm going to put it in a book and sell that thing for listeners. Like if you need some motivation and inspiration, you buy this and you listen to the show and you're going to be so motivated. Like I can do
That's a good
hard
idea.
things. I'm going to lean into the uncomfortable feelings. And the last one that you said was, oh God, I lost it. Okay. I can do hard things. I'm going to lean into uncomfortable feelings. And I
Was
lost
it
it. Okay. Oh man, that was a
taking
big one.
opportunities or something?
Oh man, it'll come to me. When it
Yeah, come
comes,
back.
I'll make sure to mention it again. But it's amazing. It's amazing what you're saying. Everybody starts from somewhere.
Yes.
That was it. That was the one. I knew it was going to come. Alhamdulillah. So it's so true. And I think one thing, you were saying this earlier that when you were evaluating your decision, you knew you didn't want to do social work, and as part of that decision came from, I've been doing this for some time and I know I want to restart my career and I know what I don't want. And I want to make sure I'm making the right decision for myself. It's like, and you mentioned age as a factor. Sometimes that age factor can get in our way and thinking that, well, I'm too old to do this or who's going to hire me? And sometimes these limitations that we set on ourselves get in our way. Or I can't go back to school at this age, or I don't have enough money. Well, you use what you have. You use what you have to get access to the opportunities that are available to make this dream happen. Just because you don't have X doesn't mean you can't pursue Y. You figure out a different path. You know what I'm saying? And I think that's what you did. You're not, and no matter what age you are, you can start again. It's just that
Absolutely.
we have this fear of starting over. I think that's what, especially with the layoffs going on, people just have this fear of updating my resume and going through the interview process again. And I
Right.
just don't want to do it again. I don't want to start over. Like there's this fear of starting over. Where do you think that comes from?
I think it comes from a bigger pressure from maybe society that just has this very traditional timeline for us kind of laid out. And if we don't follow that timeline according to the T, then we're considered abnormal. It's considered weird and just like taboo to not follow the timeline that is standardized. And so
Absolutely.
breaking away from that is scary, but it's also we're following whatever path is most aligned with our own goals. It's outside of whatever pressures we're getting from external sources.
Absolutely. Like it's a little side tangent here, and I'm going to take it back to imposter
Yeah.
syndrome. Speaking of timelines, it's so relevant for women who are even family planning. I think I'm getting the name right. It was Eva Mendes or Eva Longoria. One of the Evas had a baby at 41, and she made that conscious choice to start planning her family after she got to a point where she wanted in her career. And at that point, you would feel like, oh, well, you're too old to have kids. You're already like more than halfway through your lifespan. Why start at that time? And I think what you were saying about the world creates traditional timelines for us and we accept them as truth and rules that we should follow for ourselves, which sounds pretty, drastic, that you are accepting that somebody else has created for how you are going to live your life. Like, I mean, but we subconsciously follow those things. And I think it's so important what you were saying is no matter what you're doing, no matter what you're trying to create for yourself, whether it's a family or a new career, you can always start from the ground up and there is no timeline. You set your own timelines. And I think that's exactly what you just described. And back to your imposter syndrome that you were experiencing, thank you so much for walking us through that. I wanted to ask you, how did you maintain that confidence in your abilities? You had this fear of, oh, I don't want to say the wrong thing and ruin my reputation, but you're a very confident individual. So how did you maintain your confidence in your own capabilities, especially in this field where technology is constantly evolving?
Maintaining my confidence in my abilities, especially in a field as dynamic and ever evolving as cybersecurity, it really came down to embracing a mindset of continuous learning and continuous growth. So I really had to intentionally leave my ego at the door at the beginning of this journey because, like we were talking about, it's really hard to go back to the beginning of something and to feel like you're being handheld through it and you're being guided. And it's such a steep learning curve too. It just feels like there's so many obstacles mounted against you. But when you put yourself, or at least for me, when I put myself in a state of continuous learning, I'm just here to absorb. I'm here to learn. I'm here to take away whatever I can from this that's going to help me grow. And I make it known to my team, to my managers that I want to attend conferences. I want to stay up to date. I'm earning certifications and I'm also actively engaging with industry communities like Latinas in Tech, which have been super, super helpful to my confidence in knowing that there are other women out there of color who are following similar journeys, maybe not the exact same, but are having shared experiences as you and I, and we can come together and talk about them. So all of that has contributed to my own confidence.
Wow, that sounds amazing. So it sounds like, again, leaning into your network and associations that you're part of and your education opportunities, expanding your knowledge, not through the structural educational forums like certifications, but making sure you're learning from shared experiences of people who have already walked that path through Latinas and Tech, as you mentioned. There's such a great resource, listeners, by the way. They even accept people who are not from the Latino background. So highly recommend you check that out if you're in tech, women in tech, and want to grow and expand your diverse knowledge. Very, very helpful people in that group. So thank you for sharing that. And, as you talk about receiving from others, I know you're very passionate about mentorship as well. And you've been a recipient of that, especially by women in tech. So how has your experience shaped your career and your approach to supporting others when it comes to mentorship?
Mentorship is so important to me, and it's played such a huge role in my success and my journey up until this point. Even just being able to connect with you and getting support from you. I have so many different people. Truly, though,
You're
I
too
mean, I
sweet.
just had, I mean, it all just, it helps me feel grounded and it helps me feel like I belong here in the space and that I have value. And the guidance that I'm getting from women in not just tech, but in other areas and other industries who are paving their own ways has really helped me create a roadmap for how to navigate this industry, which can be very tricky. It can be very isolating at times. And it just showed me the value of embracing vulnerability while also asking for help when you need it. And yeah. And sorry.
No, go ahead.
Oh, okay. And I was just going to say, I've just learned how important it is to approach mentoring and providing the same support if I can. And if it's going to help someone else grow in the field, then I'm definitely going to help share my story.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Before I get to that about how you're mentoring others and supporting others, I want to backtrack just a little bit, take a little step back. How did you go about finding your own mentors? You're entering a new field, everything's new. It's like going into a new city and buying a house and figuring out everything, where I'm getting the groceries, where am I going to go, pray, where am I going to go get my gasoline or fill up my, not fill up, but like go charge my car if you have an electric vehicle and so forth. Like you have to figure out everything. So it feels kind of like that, like similar situation. How did you go about finding those mentors in cybersecurity to support you in your path?
Just researching and just reaching out. It was something that was recommended for me to try out early on in this journey because like you said, I didn't know anyone. I had no prior experience. I didn't know anyone in the field. And what I did was I reached out to my friends, my loved ones, people I was working with, even in social work, and just saying, hey, I'm thinking about making this change in my life into IT and tech and cybersecurity. Do you know of anyone that I can talk to and learn more and hear about their experiences to know if this is the right path for me? And through that means I was able to connect with women and women of color in tech who were willing to meet with me and pour into me and share their experiences with me as well, which was how I was able to make those initial connections, which led to more connections.
So it's like a trickle effect. One leads to the other.
Yes.
One thing I learned in my internship back in HP, which is some time ago, when one of the people I met on my team said, when you meet one person, ask them to introduce you to 2 or 3 more. And that has been such a helpful strategy. And I use it all the time. I use it in my business. I got a course going on right now. It's Ramadan. Ramadan Mubarak to all the Muslims out there who are listening at this time. And I told them in my course that I'm leading right now that everyone in this course, I'm doing challenge number 2. I'm doing challenges with them every week. And challenge number 2 is bring 2 or 3 people to this group, share this gift of this course with them and tell them why it's helpful. And here's why it's helpful. And it has such an impact. You can take that concept and use it for networking. You can use it for mentorship. You can use it for growing your business, your social groups. It's such a powerful way to just bridge connection by using that one person, or you can even be that one person, so forth, right? And trying to expand how we're connected in that way.
Exactly.
But that's just a beautiful example that you shared. So thank you so much for sharing that. Before I go to the next question, I remember you mentioned specifically connecting with women of color in tech and Latinas in tech. I'm curious, did you find that there was a difference in the advice, probably like how it impacted you or how it resonated with you when you talk to women of color and Latinas in tech versus non-women of color and Latinas in tech? Was there how did that work? I'm trying to figure out how to phrase this question.
Right.
How did that work out for you when you tried to just seek out mentorship, but you found somehow Latinas in tech and women of color in tech somehow resonated with you better? And I'm just wondering, how did the advice from both sides, like women of color and non-women of color and so forth, impacted you?
Yeah, that was a distinction that I was aware of. And I knew that I wanted a mentor, and it was desirable for me to have a mentor who was someone who looked like me, someone who could reflect and empathize with the experiences I was having as a person of color. But I knew that because of the underrepresentation of women of color in tech, that it was less likely I was going to be able to get a mentor like that. So I knew that going in, and I accepted that. And I was open to the idea of still having a mentor who was a woman, who was not of color, and still finding value in those shared experiences and any information and insights they were willing to share with me. And so that's when I was reaching out to different organizations, like Latinas in Tech was one of the first ones I reached out to. And I also became a member of ISOC, which is an international organization, and they offer a free mentoring matching program, which I enrolled in. And I was matched with a woman who was a director of security at a consulting company. And so we met and we connected really well. And I've been meeting with her regularly for several years now. And so even though she's not a woman of color, I still hold a really high amount of respect for her and for the information and experiences she's still willing to share with me. I think that there's still a lot of value in it. And even though it's not I don't want to say the ideal I was looking for in a mentor, she is still an ideal mentor to me. And she has helped me navigate a lot of situations I've run into.
Thank you for sharing that. I think that's such an important point, because sometimes we get so, as you mentioned, wrapped up in looking for people who look like us. And I think sometimes that feels good, right? Going back to that comfort part. Like, I want someone who looks like me, who knows my language, who knows my culture, who can relate to me. But when I just said those words myself, the thought that came in was, isn't that keeping you in your comfort zone? How is that giving you a fresh perspective? How is that helping you see things in a different way to help you challenge your own mindset to get out of justifying things for yourself? Because sometimes I feel like, and again, this is just coming to me, that by looking for people to be part of groups of people who look like us or find mentors who look like us, we're just finding other ways to protect ourselves from trying something new and learning something new and being okay to be in this unknown zone. But what are your thoughts about that and what I just shared?
No, I think that that's accurate, and it holds a lot of truth. And I think that it's something maybe that's not spoken about enough, because the fact of the matter is that in tech, there's an underrepresentation of women of color. And in fact, it's the truth that we have to accept, and we have to still kind of work around. And we're not going to just stop and give up and not find a mentor if we don't have the one that we want. I mean, for me, it was still about finding someone that can support me and who aligns with me and understands my goals. I just lost my train of thought, but finding someone who understands my goals. And I think that everyone has perspectives that hold value, that I can provide me insights that will help me do my job better. And it plays a lot into just being open to meeting new people, to making network connections, to talking with people that may not have shared perspectives, but who are giving you additional insight into different perspectives. So diversity is what we are working towards, right? I mean, that includes people who are not of color as well. But yeah.
Totally. I think
that sounded kind of mad, but I didn't mean it. I hope that came off okay.
No, not at all.
I didn't mean it. Yeah.
I think that's why I had such a hard time structuring my question when I initially asked you, because it's like, you don't want to offend anybody, but you don't want to cookie cutter it either. So I was really struggling. How do we put this thing together?
Yes.
But it's so true. And, I'll tell you, I'm a non-traditional Latina. Like, you meet me for the first time, you won't even think I'm a Latina. But that's because I'm not just a Latina. I'm Caribbean Latina. I'm a Muslim first. And that's really huge for me, because I used to do a lot of things that the Latina culture follows. But my religion, I made the decision to become more spiritual than I was. I was always spiritual, but I decided, I want to take it a step further. And that meant I had to let go of certain things that my culture was saying, the culture is this. Well, my faith needs to become my culture and the way I live my life. So I need to let go of some of those things. And that was hard. And, Latina, I'm not going to specify certain things, but as Latinas, you know what I'm talking about. There are certain things that are really hardcore to your roots. And you're like, I can't let go of this. But I mean, change is hard. Change is hard, but it's enlightening, And the more that we can be comfortable with experiencing the unknown and go through this process of change, the more growth we will experience, and the more we will allow ourselves to experience our true potential, is what I feel. And I feel that's what you were able to do by not just seeking out mentors who look like you and feel like you, but that director that you mentioned for a consulting company in security, I can only imagine how much she has shifted your perspective and helped you to grow mentally and emotionally through this whole process of, representation and being more confident in your abilities and capabilities as well. And speaking of representation, you mentioned earlier you were passionate about mentorship and representation in cybersecurity. Can you tell us some of the ways that you were mentoring others and involved in supporting the next generation of professionals in cybersecurity?
Yeah, absolutely. So in my journey in this career change, I actually had a student worker position that I got, and it was one of the most rewarding experiences of this journey, and it helped shape me into the professional that I am today. And because of that, I am very proud of the fact that I was able to have a heavy hand in shaping the IT student worker program at my current organization for one of the IT teams. And it's something I'm super proud of. And having been a student worker myself, I understand how impactful that experience can be to one's success. And it's given me a strong sense of responsibility to guide others and give them that same opportunity that I had. And so my goal with the student worker program was to give them very unique experiences, give them valuable opportunities that they can learn from that will help them stand out once they graduate, whether that's getting them involved in a cloud migration project, there's so many companies that are transitioning from on-prem to cloud. And so that's a really valuable experience to be part of an implementation team in that way. And if you have insights to that, companies will see value in that. So just trying to recognize and see and grab opportunities for them and making sure that we are doing our due diligence to support them and recognizing their unique talents, offering really honest feedback and just about their interpersonal and technical skills, and also not shying away from calling out mistakes so that we can use them as learning opportunities, as painful as it may be.
And that goes back to this whole process of change. Like sometimes you feel like, I don't want to make a mistake because it's going to ruin my reputation, or it's going to make me
Right.
feel like I don't know what I'm talking about. But that's the way we learn.
Right.
That's exactly the way we learn. If we don't allow ourselves to make these mistakes and parse out the learnings, then we're not growing. We're staying
Right.
stagnant. And especially if you're in this field of tech and especially cybersecurity, you can't afford to not make those mistakes. You can't afford to not grow, because not growing means you're out. And so I think that's a very powerful reminder. And, the students are very blessed to have you and those resources at the university so that they can be comfortable making those mistakes in a safe space. So when they make them in a non-safe space, so to speak, they'll be even more comfortable and willing to take those risks. And, I want to transition a little bit to the more personal stuff really quick, away from the whole tech field, because I know a lot of your perspective of how you think, how you show up, how we came to interact, guys, Lisa Beth and I actually met through Latinas and Tech, and we've had such a lasting connection, and I'm so grateful for that. Sometimes you just meet people that just click. And she was one of those, we just click. And I hung on to her. I'm like, we need a new one. And we had some more coffee chats, and it led to this. It's amazing. So you never know. And that reminds me of something I spoke about with our first ally podcast, Alejandro. You never know who is going to be your gateway to your next opportunity. So listen in, folks, to Alejandro's episode for guidance on that, especially for immigrants and women. It talks a lot about how to use, and introverts, how to utilize your skills to use people as a door for your next opportunity as well. But Elizabeth, back to you. Want to mention a little bit about your personal background and how your whole perspective of going outside of your comfort zone, looking for people who don't quite look like you. I think some of that comes from your upbringing, which I recently learned about. Let's talk a little bit about your journey as an adoptee. So being adopted, and as adoptee, you grew up in a transracial household. How has your understanding of identity and belonging evolved over time, given that experience in your childhood?
Yes. So to kind of give some more information, I do, like you said, I'm coming from an interracial, transracial household. My siblings are all adopted as well. And I'm adopted from Guatemala. My brother is adopted from South Korea. And my two sisters, one is adopted from Russia and the other is adopted from within the foster care system in the US.
So were you were living in Guatemala when you became adopted?
No,
Or were
so
you
my
living in the US and then your roots are in Guatemala? I'm just curious about the context.
Yeah. So my heritage is Guatemala, it's my ethnicity, but my biological parents flew to the US and gave birth to me, and then they flew back to Guatemala. So I was born here in the US. I've never been to Guatemala, and I don't speak Spanish very well, but it is my heritage.
Interesting. I didn't know that.
Yes.
Wow. Okay, we have to say this. I'm going to keep that one in my back pocket and bring it up later.
Okay.
Please go. Please continue.
But yes. And then my adoptive mom is African American and my adoptive dad is Caucasian from the rural Midwest. So we are quite the hodgepodge kind of thrown together. We don't look like we fit perfectly together, but we are a very close family. And being an adoptee with parents and family members that don't look like me, it really did influence my self-confidence and my identity growing up. But it also influenced my cultural competency and being able to honor diverse perspectives, knowing that just because someone doesn't look like me doesn't mean that we can't find common ground and there isn't something that I can learn from you. And so growing up, navigating that cultural identity was difficult, but it really shaped me into the person I am today, especially when I'm entering spaces where I'm being made to feel like I'm unwelcome just because of the way that I look.
When you told me about this before today's recording, I was blown away. And listeners, I was blown away because when I first met Elizabeth, she was unlike any other Latina that I've met before for the first time. Like, I met many Latinas for the first time, but she was different. And I couldn't pinpoint what was different. Like, I knew there was something. And then, bingo, she said it. It was her household, growing up in a transracial household, being an adoptee. I started envisioning how much that must have transformed the way you think, the way you breathe, the way you view the world around you, and how amazing of experience it must have been for you to have such opportunities at such a young age when people are cultivated to be racial and prejudiced and biased. And you don't even know that it's happening to you until you get to a teenager or your 20s. You're like, why am I a racist? Why am I thinking about this other person who looks different from me? And you don't even know where it's coming from. That's where it comes from. It comes from your upbringing. But you were blessed that you didn't have that you can just kind of wash past that all and start afresh from such a young age. And I'm like, you're just received amazing, amazing gift as a child. But one thing I wanted to ask you about really quick was, and I think this might help, expand our overall thinking and how we interact with others. You mentioned that your family flew here, your original parents flew here and they went back, and you also don't know much Spanish. I mean, that sounds pretty hard to accept when you talk about being a Latina, Guatemala, you're trying to figure out your identity and build confidence in your identity. How did you begin to accept this is my identity, and what is that identity for you even today? Like, how would you describe yourself as Elizabeth? Like, what is your identity based on everything you learned growing up and even now in your life experience?
Yeah, that's a hard question. It's one that I still don't really have a good answer to, even at this age and going through all these experiences. I just like to think at this point I'm just me, and I'm not going to intentionally mold myself or change anything about me to fit molds or stereotypes that people have preconceived notions about me when they look at me or when they're interacting with me for the first couple of times. And so it's really been the ultimate test on making sure that I'm staying genuine and authentic to myself, and just instead of seeking validation from the people around me, I'm just learning to embrace my identity, which is, I don't know what at this time. I'm Latin American, I'm Hispanic. I was raised American there, and I have cultural infusions of African American in me, and from my mom's side, or Midwestern and flavors in me from my dad's, and it's difficult to even pinpoint it, and it's a hard question to answer.
I feel we're so connected on that note.
Yeah.
It's like, for me personally, I feel like I talk about this story so much in every of my episodes. I don't even know how much time I brought this up. So sorry, listeners, if I'm repeating some stuff here. But for me, it's like I grew up in a household of Latino Caribbean immigrants, but they don't even know that they're considered Latino because they're from South America. And there's a country called Guyana, and it's embedded between Venezuela and Brazil. And you won't even know that they're considered Latinos, but because they're part of South America, they're considered Latinos. They're part of the Latin America population. But it's such a mixed bag of people that live in Guyana. They don't speak Spanish. So then it's like you argue, well, how are you even Latino? Well, then why do you consider Brazilians Latino? They speak Portuguese. So it's like, how do you then create this cookie cutter definition of what makes a Latino? You consider Brazilians Latino, Guyanese are not Latino. It doesn't make sense. So if your definition is Latinos from Latin America, right, then every country that's part of Latin America is technically a Latin country. And so my parents didn't know that. They would tell me, oh, we're from Guyana. I'm like, okay. I didn't even know what that meant at the time. I didn't even know I was considered Caribbean. I didn't know I was considered Latina. I didn't know any of that. But my whole neighborhood shifted from being like Caucasian and African American to primarily Latino. I had neighbors from Guatemala. I had neighbors from Ecuador. I had neighbors from El Salvador. And I'll tell you, I learned my Spanish accent real well from them because none of my neighbors spoke English except for the kids. And I would be like, "What's Pati? Está Elizabeth?" Like when I would try to say, "Is Elizabeth at the house? Can I come and play with her?" And her mother's name was Patricia. So I'd be like, then they would call her Pati. I'm like, okay, I'll call her Pati. And so it was so, and they treated me like I was one of them. I
Yeah, and
was
it sounds like you
family.
were surrounded by them too. So you
Oh
had like
man,
them to like practice and
yeah,
yeah.
we spent hours together. We would play baseball, we would play soccer, and I call it football now. Like I don't even call it soccer, like football. But it was amazing. Like they would invite us for birthday parties and make sure we take enough tres leches cake to come home. I didn't even know what that was. Like, oh, this fucking cake. I never felt like I was disconnected. And from there, I realized this is my Latina roots. I grew up Latina to the extent that my family is from Latin America. My neighbors taught me more what I needed to know about the culture of Latinos, and my parents taught me from the Caribbean side. And later on in life, I understood I don't fit any one of these categories. And then I take a step further and I'm going to go more spiritual. And it's like, well, I really don't fit in any category here. And it's
Right.
just like what you said. I'm not going to let people define the mold that defines my identity. I'm going to constantly learn and evolve my identity as I wish because I define it on my own terms. And as we mentioned earlier, society doesn't define it for us.
Right.
And that's what I meant, that I felt so connected with you when you said that, because
Mm.
it's really like when you tell people, oh, this is who I am, and their face starts changing. I'm like, what? You're Latino?
Mm.
Who are you kidding? You look like one. And so it's like, how can you even let those expressions and what people say about you affect you? So then that tells me you got a confidence issue. You don't know yourself well enough. And I think, for women listening in, we need to take a step back and reflect, what does it really mean to be the identity that we are? And what is that identity for us today? And never let anyone question that for you. It has to be so deeply rooted in you that you decide how you're going to evolve. Other people don't make that decision for you. And I think you're right on that path, Elizabeth. So thank you so much for sharing that. I'm sorry, I kind of took up your space here. But, going back to, your experience as an adoptee and everything, how has all of that helped you as a woman of color navigate spaces where you might feel underrepresented?
It's affected me because it's helped me address some of the biggest challenges I think we face as women of color in tech. And it's navigating a field that's not diverse. And we don't see people like we talked about it earlier. We don't see people who represent who we are, what or our values or our roots. And it can feel really isolating. And especially in organizations that aren't prioritizing diversity and inclusion. Even when we find other women and we are looking to them to open up or share their experiences, there's an added challenge because we also need to find a woman who is willing to lift up other women. And I've had experiences in tech where I've met women and I thought, oh my gosh, this woman's amazing at what she does. I wonder if she'd be open to having like a coffee chat or maybe talking a little bit about what her experiences were up until she got to this amazing position. And when I reach out to them, ends up being that this person, it has a very outdated and I would say somewhat toxic mindset in that they don't want to help lift me up as a woman because they had to fight really hard to get where they were at and for a really long time to be where they're at today. And while I understand that perspective, I think that it's a really toxic one that perpetuates a system that keeps women under the thumb of men. And it's forcing us to constantly play by the rules that were never designed for us to succeed. And so, yeah, it definitely shaped how I approach other women in the field. I would love for it to be women are empowering women everywhere, but it's just not the case. And so it helps me kind of address that challenge and recognize it. And it also helps me address bias and stereotypes that we often face, whether it's assumptions about our skills or pressure to fit into these molds or adhere to these timelines that they're giving to us. Standing up for myself and maintaining my boundaries that go against someone's stereotypical view of me can be really uncomfortable and intimidating, especially early on in a career. But for me, entering unwelcome spaces and being judged for how I look or with the group that I'm with is something that I'm very used to.
It's so hard, right? Like
Mm.
people are judging you, they're attaching stereotypes to you because of how you dress, how you look, and everything. And you said it's something I'm very used to. And I can hear some pain in that. And I deeply, and I really mean this, I deeply resonate with that. Because if we were to meet in person, you would think that I'm from a different country.
Just based off looks alone.
Yeah, like it's like the way that I choose to dress is my choice, but it's very un-American. It's very un-Latina. It's very un-Caribbean. It's simply Raihana, and it
Mhm.
evokes my identity. And I think it's sometimes when you look at the way that somebody's dressed, you start attaching all kinds of judgments, as we mentioned earlier. And that's the benefit in talking to people and being mentored by people who don't look and think like you. And then we start making the wrong assumptions, and we start having these insecurities about that person, and then we have negative thoughts associated with them and feel like, oh, they're out to get me. And it just continues. It's just this negative rail of emotion and thoughts that are attached to what we just created in our head about this person, and it might not even be truth. And so I'm wondering, as we wrap up here, as people are attaching these judgments to you and stereotypes, even though it's something you've gotten used to, how do you navigate first the pain of even saying that? And second, how do you overcome those judgments to remain confident in yourself and passionate about the career advancement that you're going to be working towards in cybersecurity?
Hmm. There is initially, especially when I was younger and having these interactions, it was very painful. It was very triggering. I would lash out and in a very reactive way because I was just emotionally triggered by what I was seeing or hearing or how people were treating me or my family. And I mean, that never really goes away. It's just that we get more evolved and we get better at controlling the reactions. And rather than immediately reacting to it, we're choosing to respond to it in a very mindful and thoughtful way that won't immediately cause some kind of argument or confrontation. And so, through my life experiences as an adoptee, even in my work in social work, putting myself into hostile or confrontational environments is something that I just really had to get used to. And it goes against our nature as humans to do that. But when you're doing that for a consistent period of time, you really just become desensitized to the initial reactions and you start to preemptively expect people like, okay, this is probably going to evoke some very emotional feelings. You're probably going to get really upset. Like this person's going to get really probably defensive because we're questioning something that they believe in or that they're doing. But how do I meet them where they are? I'm not here to argue. I'm not here to get in any kind of fight. I'm here to understand your perspective and meet you where you are. And so that's the kind of the mindset that I've gotten used to as a social worker. And I've social worked myself throughout this journey. And like you said, I'm trying to guide myself on this journey. And it's what continues to fuel my belief that women of color hold value in the space of tech. And we need to really embrace our unique backgrounds and skills and use them in our strengths because they're what give us our valuable perspectives and what it brings diversity and uniqueness to the table, which is what we want if we want to continue to innovate and continue to make all these changes in tech.
Makes complete sense. And thank you for sharing that. And I think it's such a hard, like another thing you just said, like you gotten used to it and I've gotten desensitized. I mean,
Mhm.
it sounds almost as hard as saying there's war going on in my country, but I've gotten desensitized to the bomb sounds going off. I've gotten desensitized to the fact that people are being killed that I know of
Mhm.
and I don't know of that are living in my country. You just think about the weight of those statements. I am desensitized to it. I don't think we realize, and people who are doing it to us, and sometimes we do it to others, I don't think we realize the weight of that because that means that you're accepting the fact that you're getting hurt, but you're now protecting yourself from continuing to feel hurt and process those emotions of pain by cutting off the nerve that's causing the pain to you in the first place when that trigger shows up. And that takes a lot of experience of pain in the first place for X number of months or years. Most of the time, it's years before you can develop the courage to cut off that nerve and say, I'm not going to allow myself to feel this pain anymore. I acknowledge that it's bothering me, but I'm going to figure out a way to move past it and just respectfully engage and find a way to not show up as I'm attacking based on what I feel like I'm being attacked on. And I think, it's important for us to kind of take a minute and acknowledge that takes a lot of courage. And it
Yeah.
shouldn't be that way. And I feel like I've also gotten desensitized to that. And I'll share more about that in my own interview when I get interviewed by one of my team members. But it's a real thing, and it's not right, and we shouldn't have to get desensitized. But I think it comes twofold. We need to do our part as women of color, as women at large, to make safe spaces for others to interact with us, whether they're of different gender or different cultural ethnicity, background, and so forth. And the same for the other side. You need to understand what are your differences and how you perceive the world, and take a step back and look at things objectively. And if we can do that from both sides, I think it would have a much more peaceful place in the world for everyone to grow, expand, and support each other, whether we look like each other or we don't. But the more that we fight each other on our differences and use those as ways to climb up each other to get to the top, I think we're just going to create more problems, and we're just going to inhibit growth for the betterment of the world, not just our individual selves. But,
Right.
Thank you so much. This was such a heavy conversation. I've had so much fun, Elizabeth. I hope you had a wonderful time as well. What's one last thing you'd like to share as we wrap up here?
Just that if there's anyone out there who's in the beginning of this process or thinking about making a change in career, I guess my best advice is to just lean into the unknown and accept that challenges and unknowns are a necessary part of this journey, and they won't last forever. The struggles you're facing now will eventually become easier, and what feels overwhelming today won't feel difficult a year from now. And you can do it. You just gotta take a step forward to do it.
Thank you so much. That was a beautiful way to end, and I appreciate the wisdom that you've shared throughout this episode. We've come to the end of our time together, listeners, and Elizabeth, but before everyone goes, be sure to subscribe to this podcast on all your favorite platforms. Give me a follow on LinkedIn, Instagram, and YouTube, and on Facebook as well. And if you have any requests for future topics or speakers, send me an email at Raihana@rockcoaching.com, and I'll drop that in the show notes for you. That's a wrap. See you guys next time.